people here are probably wondering, I'm wondering, what does the CTO do, head of engineering? What are you concerned about nowadays? What are your priorities? So if we can just start with the top 2 priorities. We can start with Selen, since I passed it off to you quickly the first time.
So my top 2 priorities right now is fundraising and hiring and building the platform. I guess that's 3, but those are my priorities right now.
My top 2 priorities are building the product that we're supposed to be building and building the team that will build that product. Those are probably really boring priorities.
What product?
It's not public yet.
Is it going to be the same?
No, I think it would probably be different.
All right.
So 2 specifically. So for me, I just took over the customer support team like 5 weeks ago, and so that's one of my top priorities right now, making sure that's good and getting better over time. The other one is just, I have a sort of large organization of people, and trying to make sure that the people are productive and engaged and doing the right things and want to stay there long term are kind of the biggest things I spend my time on during the week. And that all of that is aligned with the business.
Awesome. So common thread, people in this case, right? So have a couple questions about onboarding. The first one is that we're here in New York City, right? And oftentimes people think San Francisco has the best talent. Is there anything special about New York that we can talk about here?
I can actually take that one. We get a constant influx of talent who just doesn't want to live in San Francisco. And I think that's great, right? So they come here, they talk about the work-life balance, they talk about being able to live where they work. They're actually talking about lower rents in New York City. Since when is that a thing that we have in our favor? And so yeah, I actually think in my opinion, better city experience of New York can sometimes get you talent that would otherwise be working in the Bay.
I mean, I think New Yorkers in general are intense and ambitious and focused, and things like I think the B2B ecosystem in New York is like a good place for it to be. I mean, it's a bunch of people who really want to solve problems. They like working. No one who doesn't like working lives here for very long because you're eventually priced out, and so. I think that intensity lends itself really well to B2B software and less of the sort of pie in the sky, let me try to create a new type of photo filtering app kind of stuff. No offense to Instagram or Snapchat or anyone else.
Yeah, Enterprise is in New York. And so I moved here 9 months ago, and I can understand the difficulties in living in the Bay Area, the prices, and then again, from grad school, all my friends, they moved to Bay Area, and not one moved to New York, so I don't really understand it. But this is definitely a good, easy city to live, in my opinion. But actually, I'll be moving back to California in 3 months, so I don't want to give a wrong answer. So yeah.
Well, you don't have to only hire engineers in New York. You don't always have to hire engineers in San Francisco. In fact, a lot of times your team is spread out. So in hiring new team members, how do you make sure that that onboard process of making sure that they're connected to the team, how do you make that a success?
Good question. So I think that one thing that a lot of companies we actually did this big exploration and spirit quest in trying to figure out what good onboarding looked like recently. And so one of the conclusions was it's good to have a plan, and that plan should include all of the different aspects that need to be figured out for somebody to be fully ramped up. So everything from, do they have the appropriate stuff on their desk? Do they know who they're going to be working with? Do they have the meetings set up that they're supposed to attend? Do they have a sense of what types of activities they need to do in the first few weeks? All of those things are kind of purpose-driven in some way or another, right? Do they have they developed the relationships they need to develop? Do they understand what their role is? Do they have a job description? And then that kind of gets you up to maybe day one, paperwork, all of that stuff. And then after that, how do you ensure that somebody's actually ramped up in their job? So do people figure out what are the criteria that I can use in order to evaluate whether somebody's learned the skills that they need in order to be successful, whether they've started producing work at the level that's expected, and how do we make sure we close the loop, and how do we ensure that that person feels that we've accomplished those goals. So that's sort of like a framework that we're starting to think through for how to onboard people, and it's sort of high rigor, high effort, but I think it's been paying off pretty well so far.
And also, I think written documents about onboarding helps a lot. Like if you've prepared already like notes like about the product, about what is where, or practical things, that certainly helps. And I think buddy system also helps. Like for each new member of the team, assigning someone to help the other new member in the team for their first week, for their first month, that definitely helps.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what they said, and that the more time you spend planning for every new hire, the better it's going to go overall. And I like to break it down into increasingly large time windows. So I have a plan for the first day, a plan for the first week, a plan for the first 30 days, and I put a name to the goal for each of those plans, right? So the task might be fix a bug, but the goal is to learn how to commit code where we work. And then the next larger goal might be, the task might be to deploy that bug fix that you just made. But the goal is to actually become an engineer, like a working engineer on the team. And to have both of those things written out so people don't just feel like they're being thrown randomly into a backlog and, here, you're another cog in our machine, help us get more stuff done. To give them the impression that that's not the case really helps, in my opinion.
Awesome. So also here in New York, we have a very wide mix of industries across finance, media, advertising, technology, et cetera. When you're looking to hire folks for your startup, how do you consider their background in terms of, oh, they worked at a bank, will they fit in here at our startup? Love to get a sense of that startup corporate mentality and how that will affect your hiring practices.
I've got the mic already, so. We actually spend about a third of our entire interview doing an assessment for a cultural fit. And we don't really care if you've worked at a bank or if you worked at a media company or a startup before. It's just how your goals of what you want out of your next job align with the experience we can provide. And so, yeah, I guess maybe people who come from a background of having a larger, more structured company come in on the first day with an expectation that things will be a little bit slower, or there will be more process, but that doesn't take very long for them to get over if they have the right attitude.
I agree. I think the background, whether the person is coming from a corporate background or startup, doesn't matter that much. The cultural fit is the most important thing, in my opinion, and especially the skills and the background of the candidate, and also the passion of the candidate. Does the candidate have passion towards the industry or towards the startup? And I think that's more important than having a corporate or startup background. But also having transparent conversations with the candidate about the expectation also helps, because if the candidate spent years in corporate and suddenly it's in startup, then the things are definitely different in startup than in corporate.
Yeah, I would echo what both of them said. I mean, the type of company you come from is maybe a reasonable proxy for the habits that you've developed, but that doesn't mean that those habits can't be changed, and that person won't be adaptable enough to transition to a different type of environment. And really, startups are all like little personality cults, and so startups are quite different from one to another. So I'm not sure that there's just, aside from the startup uniform of maybe plaid shirt and jeans or whatever it is, and some feigned interest in posh beer or something like that. I'm not sure that it's that different. So,
awesome. So we'll move over to product. So given that you've all actually had corporate backgrounds at Apple, Amazon, Boeing, right? How do you compare it to your current work now in a startup in terms of the pace, the planning, the building of product?
So my first job was working on the 787 airplane. And if you have any idea of how airplanes are built, it's not quick and it's not agile. So night and day difference between building a new airplane project, which takes 10 years, versus shipping products in months, right? So faster.
I think my previous experience was also very fast-paced, but definitely in startup was fast-paced and it's changing too. So it's not like you have a plan like that will, the span is whatever, some time period. I think this is different. Like, of course, you plan the product and everything, but things are more fluid in a startup than, big corporation.
Unless I need two mics, but I think I'm fine. The last project that I programmed before Greenhouse was at Thomson Reuters, which is like a 55,000 person global megacorp holding company kind of thing. And it was a 1.5 year release cycle on a video distribution appliance. So, relatively slow as well. But I also think I learned a lot of lessons about what to do in later stages of the startup that I wouldn't have learned had I just stayed in startups, especially if I just stuck in seed stage or Series A startups. I wouldn't have learned lessons like what does a rigorous quality process look like, where it costs $7 million to deploy your appliance. And then how do we back off of that to find the appropriate level of rigor for where our company is now? And so I think it showed me some extremes. It showed me what large bureaucracies looked like, what it meant to try to get 20 stakeholders bought into an idea instead of just one person or impulsively making a decision. So I think I learned a lot of really important lessons there that helped me better adapt to later stage startup life and prevented me from sort of like capping out at 10 or so people on my team. So really valuable.
So that's an awesome transition, because the next question is, what are the biggest learnings in your current role of head of engineering? What are the biggest challenges, and are there any best practices that you can share to the audience of things that you've learned?
I think defining the set of features is very important. Like instead of you may have the tendency to plan to think of adding all these really cool capabilities to the product, but actually drilling down to a few really important use cases is very important, and so that you don't start boiling the ocean and you solidify your product along the way.
I think my biggest learning was that as much as we would like developers to be fungible and not have specific aggressive skill sets that they want to utilize, that's not the truth, right? So it's been a lot of refocusing on the people and what each person brings to the table and what they like to do and how to make the best cohesive team out of the people that you have. That was actually, unfortunately, a big surprise to me.
Yeah, for me, I would say the only scalable strategy that exists is really culture, and using culture throughout your management tier, throughout your company to provide orientations for how all of the people in your company make decisions. What do they think good looks like, and are they aware of all of the different concerns that more senior people are aware of, or customers are concerned about, or the sales team are concerned about, and how does that inform the day-to-day decision making that they make? Are they sufficiently empowered to make change on their own, or do they have to go through a large bureaucracy in order to get those things done? If you have a culture where people are empowered, where people's opinions are well informed by all of the stuff that we would consider important in order to make a good decision, then in general you've got this really powerful organism where everyone is making decisions that are attuned to the needs of the overall organization, and culture is sort of the tool to do that. So I try to reinforce what's important over and over again, very repetitively with a lot of the people in the management team and through one-on-ones with everyone in the group, and things just sort of, I don't want to say magically, but things tend to align well with what's actually important, I think. So.
Awesome. And next question is, how do you split your time between maintaining your current product that your customers love, that's why you found your success, with looking at the latest and greatest and how you can change and innovate?
I'll let someone else take that one.
I'll bookend it. I'll go back to back. I don't spend a lot of my time looking at technologies anymore. Now that it's an 80-person org, I'm mostly dealing with people, organizational, or business issues. So I'm not sitting on demos with new startups most of the time. So it's actually really cool to see some of the demos that I saw tonight. It's not something that I'm usually spending my time doing, and there's a lot of really cool innovation happening. So I should probably come upstairs to the Meetup more often. It's one floor away, which is one of the lessons that I've learned. But yeah, I think I'm mostly dealing with other types of problems than new tech.
So my team's focus has recently expanded from the product that we've been working on for years to the net new product that I was alluding to earlier. So this is literally my day-to-day, and it's a huge struggle. I don't want to try and paint it any different way. To not be as engaged with the customers as we were before, or not focus on every little issue that comes in with the same rigor, in order to be able to carve off solid blocks of time to focus on the new things that we know we're building toward, is actually really difficult. And I think the way we're handling it is, basically just on a case-by-case basis. This thing comes in, prioritize it against like how important is this versus the schedule for the net new things that we're trying to build. And as you were talking about creating decision-making frameworks earlier, I'm still in search of the perfect decision-making framework in order to automatically allow people to empower people to triage those things and make those decisions without my input. But it's definitely a struggle.
I will say I do have one little trick that I've started using recently. It's literally a set of slides called context that I put in my quarterly like kickoff meetings and try to circulate a little bit. And it's a slide for the customer's lens on how we're doing on something, the sales person's lens, the executive lens, the board lens, and I'm always kind of in search of new lenses just to sort of provide different perspectives, and those perspectives are often like the things that are informing how I think we should be making decisions, and by sharing those, other people make better decisions. But that's one tiny technical thing that I've started doing that I think is helpful. Yeah.
That sounds great to me. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. So Alkymi is still at a very early stage, so I don't know if that question really applies to me. But I think new things come up all the time, and but one should always read. I think, and it's very hard to dealing with all the things that you do in daily life. But I think it may not be important to you at that moment, but I think reading and allocating time every day to read, it just makes your company stronger every day, because you'll have a broader vision on what's important and what's not.
Awesome. So actually with that question, we have a range of kind of size of company, stage of company here. With the journey of being head of engineering, are there new skills, languages that you have to learn to speak to with business people differently? Anything that, from a skills perspective, you've been accumulating and honing in on?
Tons of new skills, mostly on the business or finance side, learning how to manage a big budget, or learning what the concerns are of other departments, because you're kind of like the representative of your entire department on the leadership team. So I think it's less technical and more learning that type of stuff at least at a later stage. I do know that my team is using CoreOS now, and I don't really know how to use it. I mean, it's Linux, right? Linux minus stuff, I think, is, and more. I know, I'm sure. That's not how we feel ourselves. Right, yes. Less split, okay.
Well, I'm working on how to communicate very complex, machine learning or deep learning, whatever terminologies to business people, because that's very important for them to understand, especially for our business too. So.
For me, it's really understanding the enterprise sales process and how completely bonkers it is, in my opinion. So the different layers and the different touch points and the buyers and who's the decision maker and how big of a discount do people have to be able to negotiate, that's all a mystery to me. I'm like, can we all just agree what the price is and just buy it? Because we know that's what's going to happen sooner or later, right?
So with all these new things that you have to do, what is the best way from a resource perspective to gain that knowledge? So if it's on enterprise sales, how do you try to implant yourself in a lot more meetings from a customer perspective, and for identifying how to decipher kind of machine learning for an executive audience? What's the best way that you can continue to learn and then teach?
I've been really lucky because the people that we brought into the company to head these different departments as we've grown are actually experts in these various different areas. And so just watching them, how they go through their process, asking questions like, why did you frame this question this way when it could have been more effective to frame it this way? And they usually have a great answer. And so that's just leveraging the resources that you already have in your company, in my case, has been an effective way.
I think like you just need to, like I try hard to like find a good analogy between like some sort of paradigm to like daily life, so that makes my life easier. So like it's hard to, it's kind of like easy to like just like blurb some jargon that's like that's could be very familiar to someone within like the machine learning community, but it doesn't mean that like this is the right thing to say, So I think I've seen a lot of people who are like very naturally skilled at this. So I'm trying to like look at their behavior and like see what they're doing so that I can, use the similar techniques in my business too.
Oh, I could. It'd probably cause some weird reverb effect. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I've done that earlier in my career was ask people in other departments what they're doing, and that was really helpful. So like, salespeople, get to know them if you're an engineer, and try to understand how they spend their day, what their concerns are, what are the blockers they're running into. I think most people are flattered when somebody from another department is interested in what they do, and so trying to do more of that stuff, especially early in your career, gives you a more rounded out skill set for when you get to the point when you get to actually apply those skills and demonstrate that you have a better understanding of some of the other concerns of the departments if you get to the executive level. So.
Awesome. So I think with that, we're out of time, and we want to actually open up to questions if there's anything in the audience that folks would like to ask. Sir in the green coat.
Can you talk about your experience delegating, being able to let go of projects and being able to trust and maintain quality?
So this is about learning how to let go of projects when they occur and dealing with that.
I think it starts with trust. At some point, you need to like start trusting people. I certainly don't think myself as the smartest person. I don't certainly think that I know everything in the world. I think at some point you like just realize, okay, like this person is equally smart and equally like knows more, like knows about things than same way I do. So you just like let go and delegate.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely important. Also, I try to use support over control whenever possible. So, somebody is running a project for the first time, help them understand what, communication cadence needs to look like. Who are the people who, I even teach people sometimes like RACI, DACI, like super big corporate acronyms like that. But that helps them think through, who's concerned with this project? What do I need to communicate and when? And then ask questions just to try to help them reason through it without exerting control or saying that's wrong. You do it this way.
For me, I've been using basically giving people a really clear mission of what a sub-team is supposed to accomplish as a way to both delegate and to measure how effective that's been. So the mission of this sub-team is to do X for our customers. And if at the end what you've built, or as we check in over time, if what you're building is not accomplishing that goal, then we've got a problem and we need to talk about like how we can correct that and get back on track. But in general, just having that mission and knowing what it is that is expected of you is like so important and something that gets so often overlooked. So I think that's been really important for me.
I actually saw a hand up there. I'll let this gentleman.
Product.
Product.
Do you want to say product?
Sure, product.
So you have it, product.
Or sales, sales can sell, a real, let's say that Greenhouse, our biggest customer right now, is about 30,000 person organization. So a big company, but at the same time, there are like 2 million person organizations like Walmart. If sales succeeded in selling Walmart, we would be done for on like everything else that we were trying to do. And so I think that's it's potentially destructive when sales sells ahead of your ability to execute. And maybe we could handle Walmart, but I wouldn't hope for it. I'm not the host.
Gentleman in the glasses.
Hi. So this was great so far, and I guess what I heard when Kelley asked at the beginning what was the priority of things that you're working on, I heard from the first two panelists hiring the team, and I heard from the gentleman from Greenhouse making sure that the team wants to keep working there. I guess I would call it retention, right? What are you guys doing once you hire your team to retain your team? Are you investing in corporate training? For example, if let's say you decided that cybersecurity was a big deal, would you try to train your IT staff in cybersecurity, or would you go out and try to hire people as opposed to training your team?
I think one of the biggest reasons why employees leave their companies is that they stop learning. So I think when you start hiring, like let's say you have a knowledge gap and you like start hiring from other people rather than training your own talent, that could potentially like cause problems in the future. Like I think that's a very delicate line. Is you want your employees to like work on a problem that they're very good at, but at the same time, you don't want them to confine at that problem for a very long time, so that you create opportunities for them to learn. And I think that's what creates retention in the company, in my opinion.
I would actually generalize learning as moving forward. So if people think that they're moving forward in their careers or on the product, basically you just need to have a forward velocity for people in order to make them feel happy, I think. And so part of that could be giving them the opportunity to learn something new. Part of that could be making sure that they know they're well supported, advancing to the next level, or learning a new skill, or positioning themselves for a career pivot, or whatever it is. It's just talking to people, finding out what their goals are and how they can move forward on those goals.
Yeah, I think all of that is right. And then one other point I would make is just that in concert with that is it's just people leave jobs in emotional when the emotions run high, right? It's sort of like I feel disrespected by my manager. I don't feel like I'm learning. I don't feel fairly paid. I think actually like the superset of even that is like respect of like, do I feel respected for my potential, for who I am today, for where I'm going, in my relationships with people? Do I feel heard? So I think that there's a bunch of different dimensions that need to be fostered through all of the relationships that encircle that person day to day. The manager, the product manager, the designers they work with, their teammates. And so again, going back to my previous point about culture, establishing a culture that creates value, that values all of the different parts of somebody, demonstrates respect and communication, ensures that somebody's career concerns are addressed, that they're moving forward. All of those different things work in concert together to keep people. I've actually only had one regrettable attrition in over 5 years at Greenhouse, and I'm sad that she left. But it's been very low attrition, and I think that's been a big part of it.
Yes.
So I have a two-part question. The biggest threads that I see that we've talked about were product and retention. The first part of the question is, with respect to, since technology is an ever-changing environment, how do you make sure that you're up to date and you're keeping up with your competition and making sure that your staff is working on interesting and exciting products and that you guys are the leaders in your industry or in your product? And the second part of the question is, in terms of running your teams, you're responsible for the morale and the mission that your team is driving. How do you do that in a good way? And how do you align that with the overall mission of the organization?
Why are you guys looking at me? So the first part of your question was how do you position yourselves in your category to maintain at the forefront? Was that right, in terms of technology? So for that, I think we're not actually old enough to have become complacent on that front yet. The thing that we're working on is so bleeding edge. The whole Kubernetes ecosystem, data center, operating system level, like huge cluster computing stuff that we haven't really gotten to the point where people look at us as like potentially stagnant. The individual technologies that we use, we are mostly written in Go, and we've got some of the technologists who are like, Rust or die, right? Like I have to move or else I won't be happy. And that can sometimes be at odds with the overall goals of what you're trying to accomplish. And so there you just, again, have to handle everything on a case-by-case basis, talk to those people. Look, if we introduce another language, tool chain, testing framework, all of that stuff, it could actually be disruptive to the company. So please, feel free to experiment with Rust on your own time, but like primarily we're building things this way. Until some of this part of the calculus changes, we'll continue doing that. And the second part was, remind me?
So mission-driven, not only with your team, but in alignment with the overall company.
Right. So I think that usually that's very natural, right? Like if the mission that your team has is critical to the success of the company, that's usually not an issue. I think the only time that would become an issue is if the mission somehow becomes at odds, like if the mission of the team becomes at odds with the mission of the company. And I unfortunately don't have any experience to speak to for that. Maybe one of the other panelists does.
So for the first part of the question, I think the easiest way to become obsolete is to like act reactive to stuff. So you have to like move forward and you have to be innovative. Then again, this like my startup's very early stage, so it doesn't really apply at my position right now. But I like innovating and being ahead of, being aware of what's happening in your environment is definitely very important. In terms of mission, I think as long as like your employees or like your team, I should say, has same core values, or their core values are aligned with the company's core values, then I think you can establish that corporate culture pretty easily.
Just for brevity, I'll just answer the second part. I think my answer is that's really hard, like aligning all of the people on anyone's team with the company's overall mission. I don't think that's like a solvable problem completely, right? I think we do a bunch of activities like trying to promote more empathy by increasing the amount of like communication through cross-team lunches, or having people do ride-alongs on chat support, or watching a sales demo, or things like that, hearing from executives. But I don't think that's a totally solvable problem.
So unfortunately, that's the end of our questions. I know we made eye contact, and I feel bad saying that I cannot take your question, but I have to pass it off.
With that, we will call it. So let's give a round of applause for all the panelists.